Okay, so get this. There's this new miniseries on Max. It's called The Confidante. And it dives into this crazy story of a con artist. This woman pretended to be a Bataclan attack victim for over 2 years. Wild, right?
Oh, yeah.
So today we're not just going to unpack this series, but also like the psychology behind this real-life deception. We've got articles about the case, reviews of the show, and even some psychological studies on mythomania. So yeah, get ready for a deep dive into The Confidante. It's a story where truth and fiction kind of collide. It's about loneliness, belonging, and the power of, like collective trauma.
I think what's so gripping about it right off the bat is how the series just blurs the lines between true crime and human drama. Like, we're going beyond just the how of the con, and we're really exploring the why. Like, why would someone insert themselves into a tragedy like this?
Right. Like the main character, Christelle Blandin. She's so intriguing. The series shows her, like, weaving this web of lies, using actual survivor testimonies. But then at the same time, she's genuinely helping out the Bataclan community. It's almost like she's found this, like, twisted sense of purpose in the middle of all this grief.
Yeah, and it really makes you question, is her desire to help actually genuine? Or is it just a way to keep up appearances, to maintain her facade? The series shows both sides of Christelle. Like, there's this one scene where she's comforting a survivor's family.
Yeah.
And it feels so sincere, But then we see her pocketing money from the victim fund.
Whoa, no way. That's messed up. It really shows how morally complex this whole thing is.
Yeah, it's not just good versus evil.
Right.
Christelle's motivations are murky, to say the least. She's driven by this desperate need to connect, but also potentially by financial gain.
Yeah, for sure.
And speaking of murky motivations, there are some really interesting parallels in the series between the fictional Christelle and the real woman she's based on, Florence Mongeau. Both were convicted of fraud, both served time. But the series, The Confidant, it goes deeper. It hints at, like, the psychology behind this behavior.
Talking about mythomania, I remember reading about that in one of those articles.
Exactly. The series, especially the final episode, suggests that Christelle might be struggling with mythomania. It's this psychological condition where people just compulsively make up stories, often to get attention or sympathy. So this adds a whole other layer to understanding Christelle. It makes us ask, is she a master manipulator? Or is she driven by something she can't control?
That's a question I bet a lot of viewers are asking themselves.
For sure.
Makes you wonder, like, can genuine empathy even be used for manipulation?
It is a chilling thought, isn't it? And it speaks to this bigger point the series is making. The lines between genuine connection and calculated exploitation are super blurry. The series doesn't give you easy answers. That's what makes it so compelling. It forces us, the viewers, to deal with these uncomfortable questions.
It's interesting. The series also does a good job of contrasting the fictional Christelle with the real-life Florence Mongeau. One article even mentioned that Mongeau got a tattoo of the Bataclan attack memorial on her arm.
Wow. It's a detail that shows how far they were willing to go, both the real and fictional con artists, to solidify their made-up identities. However, even though the series is inspired by Mongeau's case, it also changes things up. For instance, Christelle has this romantic relationship with a survivor, which didn't happen in Mongeau's story.
Why do you think they added that?
Maybe to explore Christelle's character more deeply. Like, could this relationship, built on lies, ever become something real? Is Christelle even capable of authentic connection? These are the questions the series weaves into the narrative.
So we've got Christelle, the fictional con artist, possibly dealing with mythomania. And then we have Florence Mongeau, the real-life inspiration, who went to extreme lengths to maintain her deception. And The Confidante blends these two narratives together to create this complex exploration of deception and belonging.
Right. And let's not forget the director, just Philippot. He's known for his work in thrillers. He brings this masterful sense of suspense and intrigue to The Confidant. There's this constant feeling of unease as a viewer. You never really know what Christelle's going to do next.
Oh, yeah. The article mentioned how Philippot uses these subtle visual cues in sound design to really heighten the tension. It's like he's playing with our expectations, keeping us on the edge of our seats.
It really shows his skill. He delivers a thriller that's both gripping and thought-provoking. He doesn't shy away from the darkness of the story, but he also finds these moments of humanity in the middle of all the deception.
Okay, so we've talked about The Confidant, this really well-crafted psychological thriller based on a real-life con artist. But what about the victims? How does the series handle their stories?
That is such a crucial point, and it's one of the things that makes The Confidant more than your typical true crime story. The series doesn't just focus on Christelle's manipulation, it also gives a voice to the Bataclan survivors. It shows their resilience and the power of community when faced with trauma.
So it's not just about the con artist, it's also about the collective experience of those affected by the tragedy.
Exactly. The series highlights how the survivors find comfort and strength in their shared experience. They form this tight-knit community bound by their grief and resilience. So Christelle infiltrating that makes things even more complicated. Her actions don't just impact individuals, they affect a whole community that's trying to heal and rebuild.
Which brings us back to the big question, why? Why would Christelle insert herself into this community, knowing all the pain they've been through?
That's where things get really interesting. The series suggests that her motivations go way beyond just like financial gain. She's drawn to this collective trauma. She yearns to be a part of something bigger than herself.
You know, it makes me think about how, in today's world, so many people are searching for that sense of belonging. Maybe Christelle's actions, as messed up as they are, speak to this deeper human need for connection.
Absolutely. The series taps into this universal yearning we all have, even if it's achieved through, like, morally ambiguous means. That's what makes The Confidant so thought-provoking. It forces us to look at our own desires for belonging and how far we might go to get it.
Okay, so before we move on, I want to go back to the psychology of mythomania for a sec. Can you tell us a bit more about what that is? You mentioned the series hints at Christelle maybe having it, but I think it would help our listeners to understand what it really means.
Yeah, of course. Mythomania, it's also called pathological lying. It's basically a psychological disorder characterized by this constant compulsive need to lie. They're often these really elaborate and detailed lies, and they're not driven by any obvious external gain.
So it's not just like telling white lies or exaggerating.
No.
It's deeper than that.
Exactly. For people with mythomania, lying becomes a way of life, this deeply ingrained habit that's hard to break.
So what causes it? Are there any underlying factors associated with it?
Well, the exact causes are still a mystery, really. But some experts think it might be linked to things like low self-esteem, a need for attention, or even a history of trauma or abuse. Some theories even suggest it could be a coping mechanism, a way to create a better reality or escape difficult emotions.
That's really interesting. So in Christelle's case, could her mythomania, if she has it, be a way of making up for her loneliness, her lack of real connection? Could pretending to be a Bataclan survivor be her way of filling a void?
That's definitely a possibility that the series explores, and it brings up some interesting questions about the link between deception and psychological well-being. Like, could lying, in some cases, be a form of self-preservation, a way to shield yourself from emotional pain or rejection?
These are some pretty thought-provoking questions.
They really are. And that's what makes The Confidant so compelling. It challenges us to consider not just the ethics of deception, but also the psychological factors that might drive it. It reminds us that human motivation is rarely simple,
right,
or straightforward.
Okay, so let's move on to another fascinating part of this series, the exploration of collective trauma and the desire to belong.
Yeah, that's where things get even more intriguing. The Bataclan survivors, they find solace and strength in their shared experience and form this incredibly tight-knit community. What's so fascinating is how Christelle is drawn to that. It's not just about exploiting individuals, it's about wanting to be part of this collective grief and resilience.
Yeah, it's like she wants that shared experience, that feeling of belonging. That comes from going through something so huge together.
Exactly.
The series does a great job, I think, of showing how collective trauma can create these powerful bonds between people. There's this scene, the survivors all gather for a memorial service.
Yeah.
And you can just feel the weight of their shared grief, but also the strength they draw from each other. It's like a reminder that we all need connection, especially during tough times.
Yeah. But then you have Christelle trying to force her way into this sacred space, this community built on tragedy. It brings up some serious ethical questions, like, can you really exploit collective grief for your own personal gain, even if, part of you wants to belong? That's the main dilemma the series is dealing with. And it's something, as a viewer, you're going to struggle with, too. On the one hand, you see how manipulative Christelle is. She's taking advantage of vulnerable people, using their pain to create her own fake story. But then there are these moments where she shows genuine kindness and compassion, especially towards the younger survivors.
Right. It's like she's playing both sides.
Yeah.
The supportive friend, the helpful volunteer. But at the same time, she's profiting from their tragedy.
Yeah.
It makes her character even more messed up. because you can't just label her as good or bad.
Exactly, and that's what makes The Confidant so thought-provoking. It forces us to look at the nuances of human nature, those gray areas where good intentions and bad actions collide. It's a reminder that people aren't just one thing. And even those who deceive us can still feel empathy and connect with others.
It's interesting, one of the psychology articles you sent mentioned that people with mythomania often have a heightened sense of empathy. Could that be at play here with Christelle? Could her ability to connect with the survivors be both genuine and a tool for manipulation?
That's a great question. And it gets to the heart of what makes this series so complex. Maybe Christelle's empathy. Her ability to understand others' feelings is what allows her to deceive them so well. It's a scary thought. But it also highlights the dangers of empathy when it's not rooted in honesty.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about Christelle, this con artist who might have mythomania or a need to belong, or maybe both. But what about the series itself? How does the Confidante use storytelling to explore all these themes?
Oh, that's another thing the series does really well. The Confidante is more than just a true crime drama. It's a really well-made psychological thriller that keeps you guessing until the very end. Director Just Philippot uses a lot of classic thriller techniques, like foreshadowing, unreliable narrators, and this gradually building sense of dread that just hooks you.
Right, the review I read, it said it was like a slow burn that explodes into an inferno. Sounds like Philippot knows how to create suspense.
He really does. And it's not just about cheap thrills. The suspense has a purpose. It reflects the emotional journey of the characters, especially the survivors. They're constantly questioning who to trust. And you, as a viewer, are in the same boat. You never know who to believe or what's going to happen next. It makes for a really immersive and unsettling experience.
And from what I've heard, it sounds like Philippot doesn't shy away from the heavy stuff. I mean, he's dealing with the Bataclan attacks. But it seems like he handles it carefully, focusing on the human impact, instead of just sensationalizing the violence.
Yeah, he does. That's one of the things that makes The Confidant so powerful. It's not exploiting the tragedy for entertainment. Instead, it uses the attacks as a backdrop to explore these larger themes like deception, loneliness, and the strength of the human spirit.
So it sounds like The Confidant offers a multi-layered experience. We've got the thriller aspect, the psychological drama, the social commentary. It's like Philippot is weaving all these different things together to create something truly unique.
He is, and he does it masterfully. The series manages to be entertaining and thought-provoking. One minute you're on the edge of your seat, the next you're thinking about human nature and the choices we make in our search for meaning and connection.
Speaking of choices, let's go back to the ethical side of Christelle's actions. This series presents this really tough question. Can good intentions ever justify exploiting a tragedy?
That's the question that stays with you long after the episode ends. On the one hand, what Christelle does is really harmful. She lies to a whole community, manipulates people who are already hurting, and even profits from their suffering. But then you see these moments of good in her, times where she seems to genuinely want to help.
Right. It's like she's caught in this moral battle between her need for connection and her willingness to exploit others.
And that's what makes this series so compelling. It doesn't give you easy answers or judge her. Instead, it makes us think about these hard questions to grapple with those gray areas of morality and consider a world where truth and lies are all mixed up.
It sounds like The Confidant is more than just entertainment.
It is.
It makes you think critically and reflect on yourself.
Absolutely. It makes us question our own beliefs about deception and belonging and how far we would go to meet our own needs. It's a reminder that the human heart is full of contradictions, and even the simplest actions can have huge consequences.
Wow, this deep dive is getting really deep.
It is.
Before we wrap up, I want to talk about something that's been on my mind. The power of storytelling. The Confidante is based on a real event, but it's also fictional. What do you think about that mix of truth and fiction? How does it add to the series' impact?
That's a great question. It gets to the heart of what makes storytelling so powerful. By fictionalizing Florence Mangot's story, The Confidant lets us explore these complex themes in a way that a purely factual account couldn't. The fictional elements help us go deeper into the characters' minds, to create that suspense, and to make us question what we believe about truth and lies.
So it's like fiction becomes a lens
Yeah,
through which we can examine these real-life issues.
exactly. And it reminds us that even in made-up stories, we can find real truths about being human. The Confidant uses storytelling to shine a light on the dark parts of the human psyche, to understand why people deceive, and to make us question what we believe about ourselves and the world around us.
It sounds like The Confidant isn't just a TV show, it's an experience, a journey into human nature.
That's a perfect way to put it. The series invites us to go on this psychological thriller ride, a moral puzzle, a deep exploration of what it means to be human, in a world where truth and lies are getting harder to separate.
Wow, this has been an incredible deep dive. We've covered so much: the psychology of mythomania, collective trauma, the power of storytelling, and the ethical questions that come up when truth and fiction clash.
We have, and we've only just begun to scratch the surface. The series is so layered, we could talk about it for hours.
I think you're right. But for now, we'll leave you with this. The Confidante is a powerful reminder that connection is something we all need. But it has to be built on honesty. When we try to belong by lying, we end up creating isolation and mistrust. So as you go about your life, think about how you connect with others. And remember that true belonging comes from embracing who you really are and being honest and vulnerable with others.
That's a great point. And if you're looking for a series that will challenge you, captivate you, and stay with you long after it's over, I highly recommend The Confidante.
That wraps up our deep dive into The Confidante. Thanks for joining us on this journey of exploration. Until next time, keep seeking knowledge, keep questioning, and keep those conversations going.
So the ending of The Confidant, it's not like a happy ending, leaves you feeling kind of unsettled with this lingering question about what happens to Christelle and the damage she caused. You see the fallout, the hurt and betrayal from the people who trusted her. But the series also hints at, like, a glimmer of self-awareness in Christelle. Maybe a chance for growth and change.
Yeah, it's like the series is saying, even people who deceive others can still find redemption, but it doesn't sugarcoat the consequences.
Exactly. It's a tough balance, but it reflects how complex real life is.
Right.
People are rarely all good or all bad. We're capable of amazing kindness and also incredible selfishness. And The Confidante captures that in Christelle.
It makes me wonder about the real Florence Mongeau. She served her time. But what about the emotional damage? How do you fix that? How do you rebuild trust with people who believed in you, who share their deepest secrets with you?
That's a really big question. It goes beyond the series itself. It's about how we as a society deal with the aftermath of deception, especially when it involves something like collective trauma. There's no easy answer, but The Confidant makes us confront these tough questions.
It's amazing how a fictional story can make us think about real-world issues. It's like The Confidante is holding up a mirror, making us see not just the actions of a con artist, but our own vulnerabilities, our own need for connection, and our own capacity for both empathy and deception.
That's the power of great storytelling. It helps us see things from different perspectives and to grapple with complicated issues in a safe and thought-provoking way. The Confidant isn't just entertainment. It's an invitation to really engage with the messy reality of being human.
What stood out to you the most? Was there a particular scene or line, or maybe just an aspect of the story that really resonated with you?
The scene that really got to me was when Christelle breaks down and confesses everything to one of the survivors. It's such a raw moment. You see her facade crumble, the weight of her lies just crushing her. In that moment, she's not a cold, calculating con artist. She's just a person, a flawed human being, struggling with her own inner demons.
Yeah, I can see how that would be powerful. It reminds us that even people who deceive others can still feel regret and pain.
Right, and it shows that empathy goes both ways. Christelle might be manipulating everyone, but she also gets caught up in their lives. She feels their happiness and sadness. It makes her motivations even harder to understand. Was it all an act? Or did she actually care about these people?
It's like the series is saying, people are complicated.
They are.
We have all these conflicting emotions. We do things that go against our values.
Yeah.
And we blur the lines between right and wrong.
Exactly. And that complexity is what makes The Confidant so gripping. It doesn't try to give us easy answers or simple moral judgments. Instead, it encourages us to accept the messiness of life, to question what we believe, and to think about the consequences of our actions, even when we think we're doing good.
This deep dive has been quite a journey.
It has.
We've really unpacked The Confidant. We talked about deception, belonging, storytelling, and the ethical challenges that come up when truth and fiction clash.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
But I feel like we've only scratched the surface.
Me too.
This series has so much depth, we could talk about it forever.
I think you're right. But for now, we'll leave you with this. The Confidante is a powerful reminder that we all need connection. But it has to be based on honesty. When we try to find belonging through lies, it only leads to more isolation and mistrust. So as you go about your life, think about how you connect with others. Remember that true belonging comes from being your authentic self and being open and honest with the people around you.
That's a great message. And if you want a series that will challenge you, make you think, and stay with you long after you finish watching, definitely check out The Confidante.
That's it for our deep dive into The Confidante. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep those conversations going.